Kim Si-woo was an ordinary man living on Earth when he was summoned into another world and forced to live as the Pope. For 10 years, he followed divine commands, endured repeated deaths, and led humanity through a global crisis that would have ended the world. When the war finally ended and the world was saved, Kim Si-woo was returned to Earth with his memories intact. He believed his role was finished. He was wrong. Before we go further, we need to understand how it all began. Kim Si-woo sat alone in a dark room facing a MeTube live streaming interface. The viewer count stuck at 0 as doubt crept in about whether he should quit. He leaned back while the blue glow washed over his face, sensing that his dream might be ending. The monitor suddenly burst with blinding light as the interface distorted, and blue energy surged from the desk to flood the room, forcing him to shield his eyes as a tutorial sequence triggered. The world vanished, leaving him standing in an empty void where his hands emitted a faint digital glow, confusion settling in as he tried to understand what had happened. A holographic window appeared, listing unfamiliar non-human viewers labeled as constellations, and the live interface updated as the viewership rapidly climbed, including subscribers from the Great Abyss. Within the digital light, a glowing goddess took form and reached toward him, addressing him as a new streamer, her image reflected in his eye as realization struck that this stream was the opportunity he had waited for. His body pixelated and reassembled as the system transported him away, announcing the start of the first trial. He landed on a stone floor inside dark ruins with a wooden staff in hand, noting his assignment as a combat streamer just as a massive low-rank demon manifested before him with glowing red eyes. He lunged forward and struck, only for the demon to deflect the blow and force him back. An icon of the goddess appeared with an offer of a special skill, urging him to show something interesting, and blue flames ignited around his staff as he activated it and declared the show's beginning. He swung, forming a wall of fire that pushed the demon backward, and the system displayed a surge of likes and donations, including one from the King of the Dead. The demon charged with an outstretched claw, which he avoided before gathering energy into his staff as cracks spread across the ground, and he promised a fair ending. A concentrated beam pierced the demon's chest, and the system confirmed the boss's defeat. He stood amid drifting ash as level-up notifications filled his vision, asking whether the viewers enjoyed the performance. The goddess descended to acknowledge his success and potential, and a character sheet appeared showing his fame and strength had doubled. He turned back to the stream interface with a smirk, telling subscribers to stay tuned, while somewhere distant an unseen entity watched through dark liquid and claimed it had found a new toy. With his staff over his shoulder, he walked toward a glowing portal and stated that it was time to work. System text announced that a timeline reset had been chosen and the regressor path activated. In a cosmic void, a glowing sigil radiated divine light as Kim Si-woo appeared in ceremonial robes holding a sphere of blue energy, declaring the beginning of the end, while a demonic face emerged from darkness speaking of despair. Dark smoke spiraled from his palm as he examined the power he had been promised. Then he looked toward descending white light and realized the goddess was watching. Facing a massive vortex of light and falling petals, he questioned how many times this had occurred before standing beside the goddess in a field of white flowers as she promised that this time would be different. Golden light reflected in his eyes as he vowed to change everything, and after walking with her across the field, he stood alone within a corridor of blue data streams, announcing his login as she faded away in white light and thanked him. Data closed in as synchronization completed, and Earth appeared encircled by blue energy as the world tutorial began. Demons and soldiers clashed across a burning city, and he observed monsters filling the sky, noting that the invasion had come early. A massive claw struck the pavement near his feet as survivors fled past, and he urged them to keep running before grasping floating data that condensed into a glowing sphere and announcing the broadcast. Facing the ruined city with visible fatigue, he stated that he was still alive as the goddess appeared behind him, declaring herself his first viewer and promising not to leave his side. He smiled back at her, telling her not to get bored, just as a red warning announced a calamity-class threat. She raised her hand and summoned a pillar of light, activating the grace of the constellation, and his parameters surged within it as he declared the real stream had begun. A live message appeared on the screen as his reflection filled it, and the goddess requested a miracle. He floated in a blue void again as energy gathered around his hands, and a golden crest formed between him and the goddess. Reaching toward it, he synchronized with the system as she leaned close, her reflection filling his glowing eye while she urged him to become her greatest masterpiece. She touched his cheek and asked if he was ready to see reality, and data flowed through his semi-transparent hands as he confirmed the contract's completion. Smiling, she said it was time to return, and chains of light tore him from the void as the tutorial ended. He reappeared in the burning city holding a glowing staff, noting how far the invasion had progressed as a multi-eyed beast towered over soldiers. He charged forward and told them to stay back, narrowly avoiding the creature's strike before cracking its armor with a counterattack as the system calculated damage. The beast focused on him and lunged again, throwing him across the ground despite his block, prompting him to demand more power. A donation from the King of the Dead appeared, energy surging into his weapon as the staff transformed and radiated white light, and he announced the main event. A massive energy beam pinned the beast and reduced it to ash, leaving behind a core as the system confirmed the regional boss's defeat. Soldiers emerged from cover and stared at him, questioning what he was, and he turned to answer that he was a streamer. Blood ran down his face as he smirked and asked whether the viewers were entertained, then walked into the smoke, declaring he was moving on. Multiple gates opened in the sky as monsters descended, and a soldier watched after him, believing he was their only chance. He reviewed his status window and noted the increase in followers, while elsewhere, a figure in a dark room watched the stream and found Juhan interesting. He stepped through the rubble with sunlight stretching behind him. A streak of blue lightning descended from the sky and reflected in Kim Siwoo's golden eye as he thrust a gloved hand forward, electricity wrapping around his arm. Blue energy erupted outward and engulfed the demonic creature in a towering pillar of light that continued upward to strike the boss, leaving surrounding buildings standing beneath its glow. Soldiers stood frozen, staring at the empty space left behind and questioning whether what they had witnessed was a miracle. As Juhan walked away, two of them watched his retreating back and wondered if he was a new awakener or perhaps a priest of the goddess, while the system confirmed that the objective had been cleared. He glanced back at them under the light of the setting sun and stated that it was not over yet. A massive demonic shadow then stretched across the city, red eyes glowing through the smoke. Later, Siwoo examined his reflection in a broken window in a dark alley and decided that he needed to level up faster. He returned to his dark apartment and sat at his desk as the monitor lit the room, a system window displaying his updated statistics and rewards, while he rested his chin on his hand and accepted that this was it. He moved through an office building in a dark coat and took a seat at a cubicle as coworkers talked about the miracle hero who had saved the city. Checking his phone, he noted the surge in subscribers on his channel. He soon stood before the goddess on her throne of light as she instructed him to entertain her further, and he bowed in shadow and agreed. She placed her hand on his forehead, leaving behind a golden mark. Siwoo later stood before an apartment door and rang the bell, entering a cluttered room filled with boxes and electronics under the excuse of a delivery. They shared instant ramen at a small table, steam rising between them, until Siwoo wiped his mouth and stated that they needed to talk. He walked to the window overlooking the city lights, blue electricity sparking between clenched fingers, then turned back with faintly glowing eyes and said that he needed help. The man recoiled in shock and asked what Siwoo was, only for Siwoo to lean forward and state that he was the one who would save him. A red system notification announced a new mission as the walls distorted and reality pixelated. Siwoo grabbed the man's arm and pulled him into an opening portal, telling him to hold on as they fell through a vortex of data and light. They landed on stone ground inside a dungeon, Siwoo already holding his staff while the man cried out in confusion. Siwoo pointed toward glowing red eyes in the darkness and told him to be quiet as a skeletal wolf burst forward. He swung his staff to form a mana barrier that stopped the charge, then drove it into the wolf's throat until the skull shattered and dissolved. Turning back, he extended a hand and helped the trembling man up before instructing him to follow deeper inside. His staff began to glow with newly formed purple light as they entered a chamber overflowing with gold and artifacts, which the man marveled at while Juhan ignored the treasure and focused on a small obsidian box. When he touched it, purple electricity surged through his arm and power flooded his body as he screamed. Juhan emerged wreathed in dark purple flames with fully blackened eyes and declared himself the new ruler. Elsewhere, a priest smiled calmly as the protagonist argued that the request required government approval, only for the priest to ask if he could help. The protagonist pointed to himself in disbelief, complained about the trouble, and wondered why he had been chosen as time passed. Under a clear blue sky outside an apartment building, he questioned whether he was being asked to become a private tutor, and the priest confirmed it. As they talked on the walkway, the protagonist asked if the payment was real, received confirmation, and fell silent to consider the offer before asking if signing was all that was required. Golden light radiated from the priest as text identified him as the guide of the saint, leaving the protagonist staring in shock before the priest formally introduced himself. They entered a modern office where a snap of fingers triggered an effect, and when the protagonist asked what to do next, the priest told him to look. The priest held up a glowing smartphone, and a beam of blue light shot upward as a system window announced a new project. The floating interface revealed a mission to tutor the Holy Spirit, with the reward listed as an hourly wage of 100 million won. The protagonist counted the amount on his fingers in disbelief, then clasped his hands and declared his readiness to spread belief, leaving the priest staring at him in confusion. Outside the apartment, his shout echoed as he proclaimed fate. A blue holographic system window glitched violently as it announced a system error and initiated disconnection. The protagonist pointed at himself toward the guide in disbelief, while the guide paused with narrowed eyes and told himself to wait. An awkward smile froze on the protagonist's face as sweat formed, and a strained sound escaped him. A loud alarm blared repeatedly between them, filling the space with urgent warnings, and he suddenly shoved the guide away with both hands, shouting for him to stay back. He stood alone in the doorway with his head lowered, breathing heavily from exertion, while the guide remained inside and tilted his head in mild surprise. A young girl with pigtails once looked up with wide eyes as the guide bent toward her on the street and addressed her politely. He smiled gently with closed eyes and knelt to her level, extending a hand, only for the girl to suddenly cry out as tears streamed down her face and the scream echoed throughout the apartment complex. The title announced that the main character was hiding his power. A school building stood beneath a clear sky as the sequence was labeled Order 63, and an adult hand and a child's hand linked pinky fingers in a promise. The girl ran down the sidewalk with a yellow backpack while calling for her mother, and the guide, now in a brown jacket, waved goodbye and said they would meet again. She ran past him crying as he remained frozen with his hand still raised. Green trees stretched beneath a bright sky as the scene shifted, and a tall office building rose ahead as someone announced their arrival. Inside a meeting room, two men sat while the guide stood near the window and was formally introduced, lowering his gaze and remaining silent as the explanation continued around him. An illustrated armored figure radiating blue energy appeared, followed by the guide's silhouette against a bright window as he looked out over the city. He later appeared in a white coat, glancing back over his shoulder, then stood in a dim room facing another man as tension filled the space and shadows crossed his face. In the present, the guide sat tapping on his smartphone, lifted it, and activated a brief signal before explaining matters concerning another individual to the protagonist. A man in a long coat was shown walking away into a star-filled void, and the guide checked his phone again while reviewing information. The protagonist focused on a computer screen as data reflected in his glasses, while the guide fixed him with a serious gaze. An image appeared of a man and woman walking with a child holding a balloon, labeled as a normal life. The small office felt cluttered as the guide stood by the window and the protagonist watched in silence, light reflecting sharply in the guide's eyes. The protagonist listened without interrupting, then looked down as understanding settled in. A circular icon displayed the portrait of a blonde man, followed by a holographic profile listing detailed information. The guide gestured toward the display while explaining, and a glowing emblem shaped like a gate appeared, prompting visible surprise from the protagonist. A logo identified the Hunter Academy as multiple character portraits appeared in a vertical arrangement. The guide pointed at a relationship diagram as lines connected numerous portraits across it. The guide finalized instructions beside the protagonist, who adjusted his glasses and declared the strategy had reached S rank. A webnovel cover appeared announcing that the main character was hiding his power, and the protagonist clenched his fist and shouted as he explained how the plan could be used. The guide exited the room stating that he was leaving, while the protagonist returned to his computer, paused, and voiced confusion at the screen. Green trees and open sky marked a new location as a white SUV drove along a forest road toward Mount Buckhanson beneath a cloudy sky. Leaves drifted down as wind passed through the forest, and the SUV parked on a dirt path while both men surveyed their surroundings. The guide walked ahead checking his phone as the protagonist followed, and a radar interface detected a dungeon as the device emitted a signal. Both halted at once as the guide narrowed his eyes. Dark energy spread through the forest as a warning announced something approaching. The protagonist asked if it was what they expected, and the guide confirmed it while faint light glowed in his eyes. Text identified the presence as demonic energy produced only by monsters, and the guide explained the rumors tied to it as he continued forward, glancing back briefly. The protagonist pointed ahead and identified Inwook. Inwook looked down, reflecting on how the situation would have ended. The priest glanced back over his shoulder at the gathered subordinates and asked whether everyone scheduled for the mission was present. The man with glasses confirmed it, and the priest silently checked the group himself, his thoughts briefly forming the image of a hooded woman with long white hair as he realized the saintess was missing. He lowered his gaze, processed the absence, then acknowledged the report and ordered the group to move out despite her not having arrived. The subordinates bowed near the SUV and confirmed in unison as the priest walked ahead, signaling the start of the operation without looking back. A faint smile formed on his face as blue particles gathered around his body, and he activated his ability, stating that he would take the lead. The man with glasses stared in shock and shouted in alarm, questioning whether the priest intended to go alone, but the priest stepped into the swirling blue portal as the others called out for him to stop. The portal closed, leaving the area empty. Dress shoes stepped onto stone ground scattered with fallen leaves as a system window identified the location as the tutorial dungeon known as the Lost Sanctuary. A second window listed the difficulty as D rank, the clear condition as defeating the boss, and a 2-hour time limit. The priest stood within the misty forest and released a long breath, alone in a clearing surrounded by tall trees. With his hands in his pockets, he observed the quiet surroundings until a memory surfaced. Images of his former party members appeared before him in the forest, facing him before turning away and walking deeper into the dungeon. They looked back, smiled, and gestured for him to follow before fading into mist and light. He remembered speaking with the man with glasses, the four-member party standing together with basic equipment, and the brown-haired companion smiling at his side. He recalled how naive they had been as they walked forward into the light, laughing together, the brown-haired companion smiling with closed eyes. The priest's eyes sharpened as he rejected the memory, and a deeper past surfaced, showing him clutching his chest in fear amid chaos. In the present, he grasped his coat and acknowledged that he had been the only one left. The memory continued as he reached out and condemned his own foolishness, the brown-haired companion looking back to bid farewell. A violent surge of blue energy struck as a scream rang out, dark tendrils impaling and consuming his companions while blood spilled across the ground. He stood frozen, then collapsed to his knees and begged them to wait as the dying companion urged him to run away. Lowering his head in the present, the priest acknowledged that moment and admitted that fleeing had been the greatest mistake of his life. He stood upright with renewed resolve as light gathered around him. A system window announced that a main quest had been generated, followed by another revealing the true nature of the tutorial. The objective was stated as survival, with the reward listed as unknown. He repeated the objective while studying it as a digital map revealed a labyrinth layout. His shoes remained firmly planted as he stood within a dark corridor, a memory overlaying the same space with his past self injured and slumped. His eyes glowed as he acknowledged the change, the image of a fallen companion flickering before him, then reappearing with blood streaming from the eyes. A radar display showed enemy signals and his own position as he stated that he knew everything. A shadowy humanoid presence manifested behind him, and a system notification confirmed the discovery of a hidden piece. The location was identified as the doppelganger's lair as the creature fully formed, accompanied by an explanation of monsters capable of copying others and how despair followed when they mimicked allies. A distant scream echoed through the dungeon, and the priest reacted instantly, questioning whether there was a survivor or a doppelganger. He dismissed hesitation, surged forward, and ran toward the jagged black distortion fractured the surroundings as Kim Si-woo's perception broke and his sensory continuity failed. He turned sharply and noticed a red digital distortion floating behind him where nothing physical belonged, making him question whether he was hallucinating. Golden particles fell around his body as he stared at his hands and realized his physical presence was blurring, prompting him to question why his information was no longer visible. He ran through a vast dark space filled with floating embers, searching for a boundary as a golden title appeared against a bright backdrop, signaling the story's shift into a new phase. White light flooded the space and overwhelmed his vision, leaving him squinting as his eyes reflected the glare, and he admitted that he could not see anything. His boot suddenly struck a solid floor, grounding him on stable ground. Studio lighting rigs and tripods stood against a dark wall, revealing the space as a constructed filming environment, and a large camera faced the stage as an unseen voice shouted for the take to stop. The director, wearing a cap and headset, gestured angrily toward the stage and shouted that Kim Si-woo could not disappear out of frame. Kim Si-woo stood on a palace set as staff moved around him, repeating the call to stop while struggling to reconcile the situation. The set bustled with crew blending fantasy costumes and modern equipment, and the director approached to point out the error and instruct him to pay attention to his angles. Kim Si-woo lowered his gaze to the script in his hands and processed that his life was being treated as a show. A staff member passed by with a brief nod, and a line in the script referenced the fifth scenario in Gods observing as viewers, which he silently absorbed. A memory surfaced of a monstrous hand reaching out from a blue vortex, followed by glowing orbs drifting in darkness as constellations watched with detached interest. He looked upward and saw only lights and wires where a sky should have been. The blonde actor entered calmly in costume and asked whether Kim Si-woo had finished spacing out, and they stood facing one another with distance held between them. Kim Si-woo narrowed his eyes as he observed how the blonde actor maintained his role without wavering, then listened as the actor leaned closer and questioned his dedication to the role and the scenario. During a break, the blonde actor handed him a small drink container and told him to stay hydrated. Kim Si-woo accepted it, his fingers brushing the other's hand, and they sat on a bench at the edge of the set like ordinary actors on break. The director reviewed footage of the distortion on a monitor and muttered about pacing and effects, and Kim Si-woo watched the reaction and recognized the expectation for stronger performance. The blonde actor adjusted his collar and prepared for the next take as Kim Si-woo finished the drink, set it aside, and aligned his focus. Crew members moved into position, lighting shifted, and the set took on a heavier presence as blue flames erupted between Kim Si-woo and the blonde actor. The blonde actor stood engulfed in the fire, his form outlined against the blaze, while Kim Si-woo observed from the edge as their hands reached toward each other through the flames and stopped just short of contact. The blue fire faded into drifting sparks, leaving Kim Si-woo standing amid the remnants. A faint smile formed on his lips as he leaned over the blonde actor. The blonde-haired man stared forward with blood-streaked, unfocused eyes as exhaustion crushed down on him, then clutched his head while red energy surged and convulsed through his body, before his gaze lowered and the red cracks across his skin dimmed as his remaining strength thinned. He stood alone on a desolate battlefield before a collapsed dark mass, chains of light binding the area as a towering dark silhouette with glowing eyes loomed in front of him and held the space between them in tense stillness. A dark hand reached toward his face in a slow, deliberate motion and halted just short of contact as the entity revealed its massive, distorted form, adorned with golden chains and ornaments that filled the space above him. His face was tightly framed as faint light reflected in his eyes, his expression steady while fallen bodies lay scattered around him and the massive entity towered nearby, the scale of destruction spreading outward. Chains of light pierced through his torso and lifted him into the air, blood dripping as he looked down at his hands, while citizens and soldiers below stared upward in frozen silence. The shadowed entity faced forward with its glowing eyes unchanged, then lowered itself to its knees within the dark void as the surrounding space fell still. A violent surge of blue energy erupted and tore through the darkness, shadows recoiling as blue flames engulfed the suspended man and arched his body violently while his form dissolved within the fire. A dark-haired man in a black high-collared uniform stood calmly within a white void, faint light glowing in his eyes as he surveyed the empty space and turned slightly toward a small presence nearby. He looked down at a small dark creature crouched near his feet and asked its name, watching as it lifted its head with wide glowing eyes and trembled while responding. After facing forward and processing what he had learned, he stood before the massive shadow entity as it reappeared within the void and asked whether it recognized him. He adjusted his gloves as the surrounding energy responded faintly, then turned his gaze aside with a slight frown before one eye reflected a golden light and his focus sharpened on the entity. He walked forward across the white surface, ripples spreading beneath each step, and extended his hand as blue energy gathered at his fingertips and the void bent to his control. The shadow entity observed him in silence and questioned his intent, then lowered itself fully to its knees as resistance vanished. He looked down at the kneeling entity, confirmed its compliance, and allowed a faint smirk to form while keeping his stance relaxed. He closed his eyes and spoke a command as the air vibrated, the entity's eyes flaring white and its form warping under the binding, before he made a casual gesture and instructed it to prepare. A towering column of blue energy erupted through the void, flooding the white space with light as the blonde-haired man's silhouette floated upward within it, still as his form reassembled. A dark clawed hand reached from below toward the ascending figure and failed to make contact while the dark-haired man stood unmoving before the light and allowed the energy to continue uninterrupted. From within the radiance, a white-haired woman in flowing robes emerged and filled the void, her calm gaze lingering as she cradled the blonde-haired man's head and his wounds faded away. He looked up at her with widened eyes as warmth surrounded his face and his expression softened, then his form gradually dissolved into drifting particles of light. The dark-haired man stood among floating blue interface panels as information scrolled, then turned toward the woman and asked whether the task was complete while studying her with narrowed, analytical eyes. She looked back and smiled faintly, acknowledging his role, and they stood together within the void as their conversation continued before walking side by side across the white expanse while he explained his conditions, and she nodded in agreement. A small blue orb pulsed steadily between them as he sat on the white surface and his shoulders lowered. Then they remained quietly together while distant lights filled the void. The blonde-haired man lay asleep in a field of flowers with even breathing as the white-haired woman stood nearby and watched over him without intervening. She and the dark-haired man faced the horizon together as the light stretched outward, her expression turning serious while she issued a warning that hardened his face as he listened without objection. They walked forward into the light as the void thinned behind them, and he later looked upward at a sky filled with complex symbols, while an image showed the woman bound in chains within another space. He held a pulsing sphere of blue energy with unwavering resolve as his eye reflected an entire world, symbols rotating within it, and a massive golden sword-shaped icon appeared overhead to fill the sky with light. The woman looked toward him once more and offered her farewell, after which he stared at the empty space she left behind and then toward the distant stars as her form faded fully into light. He gave a small nod as the moment passed, her gentle, smiling image lingering briefly before a close view revealed a necklace against her chest with a glowing blue gem. A new system message appeared before him and his eyes widened slightly as he read it, while their silhouettes appeared together against a colored void, and he looked down at his glowing hands as new energy coursed through them. The woman turned toward the final light and vanished as the white void darkened and the dimension closed. The goddess gazed downward with a serene smile and expressed gratitude for resolving the crisis, her radiant form shimmering as she spoke of remaining a blessing, and then manifested once more with a golden halo to bestow a final blessing, leaving behind a single blue flame and a promise that they would meet again. The martyr suddenly sat upright and screamed as consciousness returned, clutching at the air and gasping, while the protagonist stood nearby and asked whether he was finally awake. The martyr touched his chin and questioned what had happened during his sunlit city intersection flowed normally as a green bus and a white sedan passed through crosswalks and pedestrians moved along the sidewalks, daily life continuing without disruption. A blue holographic system interface floated against the city backdrop, displaying technical data tied to a demonic gate incident and outlining the current threat conditions. He reflected that public opinion shifted easily and that reputation changed with circumstance, acknowledging the necessity of managing how others perceived him. Han sat in the backseat reviewing global news and data on a blue laptop while Minsu leaned closer, listening as they considered public reaction to the recent monster incident. The doppelganger incident in Korea was recalled as a completed event, clarified as a catalyst for further developments rather than an isolated threat. The appearance of a demonic gate at this stage was identified as statistically abnormal, the deviation pointing toward growing inconsistencies in the world's expected progression. The manager rested his head on his hand inside a cluttered room filled with crates and paperwork, visibly overwhelmed by the administrative burden left behind by the crisis. Reports detailed an extensive death toll and recorded monsters extracting high-level fuel from victims, the losses conveyed in detached, clinical terms. It was stated that only a carefully staged miracle could effectively sway public opinion, identified as the key objective for the upcoming meeting with Kale. Han looked out the car window with steady golden eyes, remaining silent as calculations continued in his mind. Minsu struggled to follow the explanation of gate mechanics while Han continued reviewing data with calm, precise movements, then stiffened in visible shock as the term demonic gate settled in and the scale of the threat became clear. Han fixed Minsu with an unwavering gaze and conveyed that the previous monster had only served as a bridge, indicating that a greater sacrifice lay behind it. The doppelganger was identified as a puppet controlled by a higher-ranking demonic entity, clarifying the hierarchy behind the prior battle. Minsu questioned the logic of visiting Kale, confusion evident as he struggled to grasp Han's unconventional strategy. The Saintess was explained as a symbolic figure whose appearance functioned as a weapon in the current era, her relevance to the plan clearly defined. A lanky demon with claws appeared within a haze of purple energy, its presence overwhelming the surrounding human scale. The doppelganger was confirmed to have been a deliberate sacrifice meant to open a path for invasion, emphasizing the enemy's strategic disregard for its own assets. A jagged demonic gate pulsed with dark energy in a barren landscape as winged monsters gathered around it, dominating the surroundings. Human figures with glowing red cores were drained of energy toward a central darkness, the process visually representing mass sacrifice. It was noted that the situation had been resolved just before the gate reached full maturation, the outcome attributed to narrow timing. Han's golden eye reflected a star-filled void, suggesting a connection beyond ordinary perception. He questioned why a demonic gate had appeared before him at this moment, and raised the possibility that he himself attracted such events. Han stood alone in a dark space filled with drifting light and examined his hands against a vast, cosmic backdrop. The events were questioned as coincidence or predetermined design, with causality identified as the governing principle. A golden scale floated in a luminous void, perfectly balanced and representing measured equilibrium. The situation was directly linked to earlier references of causality, tying present anomalies to past events. Han lowered his gaze, reached a conclusion, and hardened his expression as a decision finalized. He resolved to create a public showcase that would captivate the world, narrowed eyes reflecting firm intent. Han explained his plan while Minsu listened beside him, the blue glow of the laptop illuminating both faces. Minsu questioned whether Han truly admired beauty, referencing the Saintess with casual disbelief. The Saintess was described as a symbol of hope in a world overrun by monsters, her societal influence outlined. Minsu imagined himself surrounded by praise and holy light, smiling absent-mindedly until realization struck and panic set in, sweat forming as his face turned pale. Han struck Minsu on the head with a blunt motion, the impact distorting Minsu's face and drawing a sharp reaction of pain. A vision depicted white light descending upon a person who looked upward as divine power manifested. Minsu stared at the display in awe while Han observed analytically, their reactions clearly contrasting. Minsu clutched the swelling bump on his head as Han watched with mild irritation, tension diffusing into exhaustion. Han acknowledged understanding as clarity settled in his eyes, and a plan involving the Saintess took shape. The moment when the goddess first appeared to humanity was documented, marking the start of her influence. The Saintess's calm, gentle face conveyed warmth and reassurance as many people regarded her as a goddess upon her first appearance, and devotion spread immediately. Her holy power was described as capable of calming violent hearts, presented as established fact. She stood in a flowing white gown surrounded by radiant light, her presence filling the scene. Her power was explained as being fueled by public faith, establishing dependence on belief. Witnesses were said to feel only reverence after seeing her miracle, emotional resistance, rendered nearly impossible. Minsu watched the video with admiration while Han remained neutral, the screen light reflecting their opposing reactions. Minsu described the goddess as kind, beautiful, and admirable, then gave a confident gesture expressing readiness to assist. The laptop displayed a video titled as an apology featuring Kale, showing high engagement as the word apology appeared alone in stark presentation. Kale was identified as a player involved in a cult-related incident, explaining his hospitalization. A shocked reaction acknowledged the video's contents as Kale appeared in hospital clothing with lowered eyes and spoke with visible regret. He asked the world to believe in his sincerity, framing his attempt at redemption. Minsu stared at the screen in shared disbelief. A golden title card signaled a transition as the scene shifted to a modern hospital beneath a clear sky. Han and Minsu entered a spacious hospital room, beginning their visit to Kale. Kale greeted them with a radiant aura and warm smile, appearing healthier than before. Han observed Kale from behind, facing the contrast of light, and assessed him silently while drinking from a paper cup with composed posture. Han questioned whether Kale intended to maintain his devotion after the scandal, then challenged him over the apology video as Kale listened attentively. Han and Kale sat across from each other while Minsu observed in silence. Kale's apology played again on the laptop as his background was explained, including a family of long-standing followers of the goddess and a father who had been a high-ranking church member before his recent death. Kale was described as once being regarded a prodigy whose reputation was destroyed by the cult incident. He placed a hand over his heart and looked upward as his devotion manifested into a tangible holy aura, confirming his awakened nature. This devotion was identified as exactly what Han required, fitting the intended role. Han evaluated Kale with arms crossed, his interest purely strategic. Han asked whether Kale was prepared to face the truth about the goddess, then presented a dangerous proposal with focused golden eyes as tension filled the room and Minsu watched nervously. Kale explained his motives and hatred of cults, stating he wanted to reveal the truth despite ridicule and expressing moral outrage toward false cults exploiting the goddess. His devotion escalated into fanatic intensity as he declared readiness to sacrifice everything, glowing eyes reflecting unwavering purpose. He offered his entire fortune to spread the goddess's name, desperation surfacing openly. Han reacted with visible fatigue as the enthusiasm continued, the exchange briefly shifting into humor. Kale clasped his hands in prayer and bowed his head, his aura softening into serenity. Han opened his laptop and prepared a video as a system window displayed data and a blurred demonic image, followed by another window listing affected individuals and ritual records. It was explained that Kale had been targeted because of his strong faith, reframing his failure, and asked whether Kale was ready to face the entity that followed him. Kale's profile appeared listing him as the goddess's chosen, confirming his rare abilities. Kale stood renewed with purpose as Han remained seated, their alliance solidifying. Han and Minsu exited the hospital suite, the recruitment concluding successfully. Kale eagerly presented additional ritual footage, while Han reviewed the information in silence. Enro leaned toward Kale and asserted control before warning him of the dangers ahead, prompting Kale's shocked reaction. Kale looked at Han with newfound awe as his loyalty realigned, and Han smiled gently with holy warmth as Kale's devotion was redirected. A ritual site appeared with hooded figures gathered around an altar, dark energy filling the space. A cultist chanted with glowing red eyes as another figure stared toward a growing light with mixed fear and anticipation. A towering demonic silhouette emerged behind the ritual, revealing sharp teeth and glowing eyes as energy erupted, and the summoning completed. An amusement park appeared under a peaceful sky where families enjoyed the calm. Han walked through the park with a small child, his demeanor gentle as he smiled warmly and carried the child on his shoulders while watching the lights. His expression turned serious as he sensed a distant change. Han received a phone call and focused sharply as grave news altered his state. He walked away from the lights and into darkness, leaving a lit skyscraper stood against the cold night sky, glowing windows suggesting Lay Tower corporate operations as an interviewer asked whether Siwoo had heard of dungeon management. Inside, the manager sat behind a desk and gestured openly toward Siwoo, who listened in silence, noting his curiosity before steering the discussion toward a more specialized subject. Siwoo met the manager's gaze with a neutral expression and asked for clarification about what management actually involved, prompting a deeper explanation. Leaning back, the manager described the tower and its logistics with confident gestures, emphasizing that the role centered on controlling environments rather than hunting monsters. Siwoo silently repeated the word management to himself, skepticism blending with fascination as he questioned whether he was truly being asked to manage a dungeon. The manager raised a tablet displaying a glowing 3D wireframe of a dungeon floor and stated that the changing world required people capable of handling overwhelming amounts of data. Siwoo stared at the tablet with widened eyes, remarking on the sheer scale as he began to grasp the weight of the responsibility. A futuristic digital screen displayed a monster classification menu filled with statistics and abilities, its clinical layout treating monsters as managed assets. Pointing to the display, the manager highlighted a specific management grade and stated that Siwoo possessed the perfect eyes for the task. A status bar filled steadily on the screen, visually introducing the concept of progress and leveling through management. The manager's expression turned serious as he explained the dimensional management system, revealing that the job extended beyond a single world into multiple dimensions. Siwoo looked down at the tablet again, his reflected face showing confusion hardening into determination as he asked what the final goal of the role was. A vision appeared of a divine figure in white robes standing before a celestial gate, its holy yet terrifying presence revealing the entity Siwu would ultimately serve. The figure raised a hand as the stars aligned behind it, reducing the human world to insignificance and reinforcing its godlike scale. A close view of softly glowing golden eyes established a spiritual connection that made Siwu feel profoundly small. The manager extended his hand with a knowing smile and asked whether Siwu would sign the contract. Siwu looked at the offered hand, then accepted the job without hesitation. The two men shook hands in the center of the library-like office as the faint silhouette of the divine figure lingered behind them, lending solemn weight to the agreement. Siwu exited the building and looked up at the moon, sensing that his old life had ended. In his apartment, he held a black business card with a softly humming gold foil logo, confirming the experience had been real. A blue system window appeared in his bedroom, welcoming him as a management candidate and announcing the start of synchronization. Unable to sleep, Siwu sat on the edge of his bed rubbing his eyes, the awakening already taking its toll. Morning sunlight filled the room as he brewed coffee, the mundane routine clashing with the sense that normalcy was slipping away. While checking his phone, he noticed a new app bearing the manager's logo and realized his constant connection to the tower. A system warning suddenly appeared, reporting an imminent dimensional rupture and shattering the calm morning. The doorbell rang as Siwu turned toward it with a guarded expression. He opened the door to find a backpack-wearing young woman surprised to see him awake, casually asking if he was heading out early. They walked down the apartment stairs under harsh lighting as the air subtly shifted with the approaching event. Stepping outside, they looked up as a massive red and purple portal formed in the sky, panic spreading as the world event began. Cars were abandoned and citizens fled screaming as the portal dominated the skyline. Amid the chaos, Siwu stood still and calmly observed the gate, clearly understanding what was happening. A bright red system window announced Tutorial Phase 1 and instructed entry into the gate. Siwu walked toward the portal against the fleeing crowd, coat whipping in the violent wind. Nearby hunters nervously prepared for battle, shouting for civilians to stay back and revealing their uncertainty. One hunter reached out to stop Siwu, demanding to know what he was doing as Siwu continued forward. Siwu turned and fixed him with a sharp gaze that radiated crushing pressure, ordering him aside and leaving the hunter frozen in fear. Raising his hand, mana swirled around Siwu's fingertips as the tower's power flowed into him. A blinding flash erupted, forcing onlookers to shield their eyes as the moment felt like divine intervention. His clothes transformed into a sleek manager's uniform traced with glowing blue lines, marking his elevated status. A massive system window declared administrator authority at level 1, blue light illuminating his face. Under his control, the gate's chaotic energy stabilized into a calm blue pulse, the first stage of the rupture successfully managed. Siwu stared into the gate with a faint, confident smirk, fully accepting his role. He stepped forward and entered the portal, his silhouette dissolving into shimmering light. Inside, a massive eye-like structure observed him from above as the overseer welcomed the new manager and established the tower's hierarchy. Siwu stood alone in a vast empty void that would become his. The hospital stood beneath a purple, apocalyptic sky as a massive vertical beam of light struck its roof, the oppressive atmosphere signaling the activation of a system event. 3 zombies with glowing eyes and exposed Kim snarled forward, one screaming with rows of sharp teeth bared as its echo filled the hallway and confirmed immediate danger. Kim Ribcades and his companion faced the approaching horde in a hospital corridor as Dokja readied his weapon and ordered the other survivor to stay behind him. Dokja swung in a decisive arc that sliced through an enemy, dark fluid scattering as a narrow opening appeared, and he immediately sprinted down the corridor with the survivor as debris collapsed behind them, urging him to keep running. The survivor, still in a hospital gown, panted heavily with sweat on his face and voiced doubt about their chances, prompting Dokja to grab his shoulder and force him to refocus with a stern command to regain composure. They reached a doorway and paused briefly, silhouettes framed by dim interior light as silence fell and they assessed the next space, then burst through the double doors in a desperate push. Under green hospital lighting, the survivor glanced back and confirmed the pursuers were temporarily blocked. On the rooftop, purple lightning intensified as a massive shadowy figure manifested, revealing the skeletal outline of a great demon towering over the hospital. Dokja looked up calmly as violet system light reflected across his face, waiting for the exact moment to trigger a hidden scenario. The great demon fully revealed itself as a skeletal king seated on a throne of bones with a tattered red cape, identified by the system as a high-ranking spirit commanding the undead, its single glowing red eye gazing down in contempt. A blue system message presented Dokja with a decisive choice, and recognizing the danger, he chose to proceed with the contract. A system window announced that the constellation known as the demon-like Judge of Fire had fixed its attention on him, and Dokja braced himself to accept possession. He closed his eyes and clenched his fists as a pillar of white light erupted from his body, cracking the rooftop while holy energy pierced through the clouds and marked the battle's turning point. Blue and white sparks surrounded Dokja as his feet lifted from the ground, his body straining as he became a vessel. The Archangel Uriel manifested behind him in radiant, translucent form, absolute order flooding the rooftop, as the Demon King recoiled from the holy presence. From the doorway, Dokja's allies shielded their eyes and whispered his name in disbelief. Dokja opened his eyes glowing with celestial white light, his expression cold and inhuman as a title card announced the Archangel's descent, and the conflict shifted into full confrontation. He lunged forward as a blur of white light toward the Demon King's core, smashing through a hastily raised bone shield as his flame-wreathed fist shattered the demon's ribcage and forced it backward. A system window displayed massive critical damage values as Dokja pressed the assault without pause. Standing amid smoke and sparks, Dokja extended his hand in judgment as a halo and faint wings of light formed behind him, and white fire engulfed the Demon King, reducing its skeletal body to nothing as its final scream faded and dark mana was purged. Blood ran from Dokja's nose as he pushed the possession beyond safe limits, and a final explosion of light swept the rooftop clean, leaving scorched concrete and drifting ash as the Demon King was banished and rewards began calculating. The white light drained from Dokja's eyes as exhaustion set in and the Archangel's presence withdrew. Massive wings of white light unfolded from his back, filling this radiant white angel with massive feathered wings manifested above a stone altar, and its presence illuminated the entire cathedral with overwhelming brilliance. The angel spread its wings wider as glowing particles drifted downward like snow, and the light intensified until onlookers raised their arms to shield their eyes. Spectators stood in the foreground staring upward, their dark silhouettes sharply contrasted against the divine glow as the manifestation unfolded before the public. One of the angel's wings extended upward while trailing streams of light, and its immense scale filled the entire space beneath it. A hexagonal system message announced that a divine being had arrived and confirmed the identity of the presence. Another system message stated that the advent had been completed, formally acknowledging the manifestation. The high priest and Han Siwoo stood on a stage surrounded by cameras, while flashing lights from recording equipment filled the area as the press gathered. A hexagonal message emphasized the significance of the moment, and public attention focused entirely on the stage. A bearded reporter looked down at his notes among the press, keeping his attention fixed on the details of the ordination. A system message stated that the class was extremely rare and described Han Siwoo's position as highly significant. The reporter continued thinking about the future potential of the new priest, maintaining a focused and evaluative expression. A system message posed a question about the future direction of the church, leaving uncertainty hanging over the scene. Journalists filled the hall with laptops open and cameras raised, while constant movement and raised voices dominated the space. A system message directly referenced the Saint class, and expectations surrounding Han Siwoo increased further. The high priest touched his chin while observing the crowd, remaining composed as he monitored the reactions. A system message explained the mechanics of divine favor and clarified the rules governing blessings. Han Siwoo stood calmly amid the flashing lights while holding a small device or holy relic, his expression remaining steady. A system message noted that Han Siwoo's level was unexpectedly low, highlighting the contrast between his status and his capability. Another system message questioned whether he could survive future trials, clearly stating the risks ahead. A reporter stared forward with a doubtful expression, and his skepticism toward the young priest was evident. A system message suggested that the church might be acting out of desperation, shifting attention toward its institutional motives. Han Siwoo looked straight ahead without reacting to the surrounding whispers, maintaining a firm posture. A system message referenced ongoing system monitoring, making Han Siwoo aware that an interface was observing him. Members of the press shouted questions from all directions, closing in as Han Siwoo stood amid the noise. A system message indicated that time had passed, preparing the scene for transition. A small system message introduced a hidden quest, establishing a new objective. The cathedral hall stood empty after the event concluded, and silence replaced the earlier crowd. A system message referenced preparation, shifting focus toward upcoming actions. A figure was shown from behind walking away from the public space, marking a quiet departure. A system message provided workout instructions and assigned a structured task. Han Siwoo stretched his arms while standing alone, preparing his body for physical activity. A system message noted the difficulty of the task and identified physical endurance as a concern. Han Siwoo examined a holographic screen listing daily requirements, which indicated that no days could be missed. A system message explained the penalties for failure, clearly defining the consequences. Han Siwoo began running with steady movement, and signs of strain appeared on his face. A system message displayed progress data during the run, tracking his advancement in real time. Han Siwoo continued sprinting as sweat became visible, while his pace remained consistent. A system message announced successful completion of the training segment, and acknowledged the result. Han Si-woo stood bent forward with his hands on his knees while breathing heavily, recovering from the exertion. A system message mentioned a reward, indicating that compensation was about to be distributed. Han Si-woo checked a device displaying online reactions, where his name appeared among trending topics. A system message displayed a supportive comment, showing growing public interest in him. Han Si-woo viewed a status window with slowly increasing statistics, reflecting measurable growth. A system message explained a holy type skill, as energy gathered in Han Si-woo's palm. A close view of Han Si-woo's eye showed a faint blue glow, suggesting an alteration in perception. The city appeared at night beneath the moon, signaling that time had advanced. A system message announced the next quest, and progression continued without pause. A glowing blue interface filled the screen with layered data, displaying the vast scale of the system. A system message explained mastery levels and showed that Han Si-woo remained far from completion. The Manhwa title logo appeared prominently, formally marking the beginning of the story. A green tree stood in a park under morning light, replacing earlier intensity with calm scenery. An apartment building appeared as an ordinary residence, indicating a return to daily life. Han Si-woo stood in his room facing a system prompt, and difficulty with the request was evident. A screen displayed a list of required items for evolution, including a sacred relic. Han Si-woo faced a mirror and examined his reflection, noticing changes in his appearance. A blue level-up banner appeared above him as energy surged through his body. A shadowy knight-like figure stood silently behind Han. A tall modern office building rose beneath a clear blue sky, conveying the authority of an organization that governed supernatural affairs. Inside, the chief sat behind his desk as Han Si-woo stood across from him. The chief explained the need to recruit a hunter capable of managing the Hunters Association, maintaining public order, and overseeing dangerous powers through the hunter management system. Han Si-woo faced forward with a calm expression, identified as a candidate meant to connect ordinary society with supernatural forces. The chief leaned over the desk and struck it with both hands, emphasizing that the role required a vessel capable of enduring the presence of powerful beings. Adjusting his glasses, the chief studied Han Si-woo closely and stated that he possessed a specific trait that made him suitable. Han Si-woo's expression tightened as the weight of the task settled in, understanding that acceptance meant stepping into a violent and dangerous world. A monstrous demonic entity loomed over a cityscape, its overwhelming size conveying the destructive power hunters could wield. Han Si-woo later stood in a doorway, recalling the chief's explanation of his unique talent as hesitation lingered in his posture. He passed through a gate into a purple-tinted training field where space warped under the pressure of immense energy. In the distance, a large muscular man sat on a bench, surrounded by a heavy aura that established an overwhelming imbalance of power. As Han Si-woo approached, the man looked up and acknowledged him, his relaxed posture contrasting sharply with his massive frame. He stood and extended a huge hand, heat radiating from his body. Han Si-woo accepted the handshake as a blue system interface appeared, identifying Kang Min-hyuk as an S-rank hunter with unstable traits. Kang Min-hyuk's aura flared red as his grip tightened, questioning whether Han Si-woo was truly assigned to manage him while mana vibrated through the field. Maintaining a polite smile despite the pressure, Han Si-woo introduced himself as the assigned manager. Kang Min-hyuk laughed loudly and stated that he would test Han Si-woo's resolve. Han Si-woo removed his coat, revealing a more athletic build as he prepared himself, recognizing that words alone would not resolve the situation. Kang Min-hyuk surged forward with embers trailing behind him, the ground fracturing under his step. Han Si-woo reacted instantly, sharpening his gaze as he tracked the movement and adjusted, knowing a direct hit would be fatal. Kang Min-hyuk's foot struck the ground and released a shockwave that sent dust and debris bursting upward, followed immediately by a monocoated fist swinging toward Han Si-woo's head and distorting the surrounding air. Han Si-woo slipped beneath the attack with controlled movement, his eyes following the flow of power. The chief's earlier explanation surfaced, revealing that Han Si-woo's ability allowed him to nullify or absorb hunter attacks, accounting for his survival. Bringing his hands together, Han Si-woo released a burst of light that disrupted Kang Min-hyuk's momentum and pushed him backward. A system notification appeared, confirming the establishment of a management protocol and registering authority over Kang Min-hyuk's mana. Kang Min-hyuk gathered flame around his entire body until it formed a towering blaze, preparing a full-force attack. Light and fire collided in a massive explosion that flattened the surrounding area and left the training field in ruins. As the smoke dispersed, Kang Min-hyuk stood upright with torn clothing and a satisfied grin, acknowledging Han Si-woo as more interesting than expected. Han Si-woo remained standing across from him, largely unharmed but visibly exhausted, recognizing that managing hunters demanded intense physical endurance. Closing his eyes, Han Si-woo formed a faint smile as he recalled the peaceful office position he had once been offered. He reopened his eyes with a resigned expression as debris. A clenched fist glowed with dense orange energy as vibrations built toward release. Hanbin turned his head while fire gathered around his body, adjusting his stance as movement approached from behind. A figure in dark clothing moved through a field of purple energy, air and light distorting around the balanced body. A vertical column of white energy erupted through the training ground, collapsing the earth inward and forcing observers backward. As dust settled and fading energy trails dispersed, Leo stood steady at the center of the impact. Students lay scattered across the field, some raising their arms or crouching low as debris drifted through the air, while one student stared upward with widened eyes at the overwhelming power gap. Hanbin faced away from the crater and stepped forward, signaling the end of the exchange. Leo looked ahead with a rigid expression, focused on the aftermath, while Hanbin rubbed his head and lowered his gaze, showing the strain of exertion before speaking with a slight grin to ease the tension. A small text construct appeared within light, transmitting information toward Leo. He closed his eyes and lowered his head as golden particles filled the space, and a blue system window appeared, confirming the acquisition of a new holy relic and detailing progress tied to an expanding congregation. Leo stood alone in a white luminous space with one hand over his chest, the environment suggesting a boundary beyond the physical world. Elsewhere, two individuals spoke in a hallway about consequences for the institution. Leo later walked through a hall of white marble with composed authority as Hanbin glanced at him with a questioning look, lingering on his earlier stillness. A figure gazed into an intense internal light as two silhouettes stood side by side facing a distant glow. A pillar of red and white light surged skyward, shaking the ground and lifting debris as Hanbin watched with widened eyes and wind tearing at his hair. Within the beam, a figure remained engulfed by energy until the silhouette vanished into radiance. Leo then appeared in formal attire holding a leather-bound book as embers drifted nearby, while a blue system window hovered above a gathered crowd, formally acknowledging the holy order. Glowing hands reflected newly granted power as detailed conditions tied to the holy relic were displayed and read carefully. A muscular red-haired man stood assertively and spoke, challenging those around him as Hanbin and another student faced him in rising tension. Flames flickered at the man's feet as his grin tightened, and light glimmered faintly in his eyes. Hanbin stepped forward with his face half-shadowed, cracks spreading beneath his feet as the man shouted a hostile demand. Hanbin answered without changing expression. The red-haired man lunged for Hanbin's throat, but Hanbin seized the wrist mid-strike, the sudden stop sending shock through the attacker's arm. Hanbin spoke calmly about the difference in strength before shoving him away, ending the confrontation. Leo looked down at the fallen man holding his injured wrist in defeat, then watched as Hanbin turned away and walked toward the school buildings, leaving the incident behind. A figure descended into a dark void filled with black energy as currents closed inward. Leo and Hanbin later walked together across the school field, moving away from the training grounds. A skyscraper rose beneath the evening sky as blue light gathered at its peak. A blue system icon marked with a cross appeared, initiating shrine construction, and the listed cost prompted hesitation as it was reviewed. Two figures stood in darkness near a glowing window, with concern on their faces. Leo and Hanbin blended into a crowd of students, while quiet conversations spread about the earlier event. A bearded man addressed Leo with guidance, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder as Leo listened attentively, and Hanbin observed with a relaxed smile. Students gathered around a classroom board filled with plans, while another figure gazed out a window over the grounds. Elsewhere, the red-haired man sat alone on a bench with his head lowered. That night, an apartment building glowed beneath the dark sky, as four people gathered around a round table with food and conversation. A large pot of stew sat at the center as Leo explained something steadily to a young woman, who responded animatedly while Hanbin ate and listened. Laughter filled the room, washing away earlier tension as Leo looked at his companions with a softened expression. Morning sunlight bathed the school building as the season shifted. Leo stood alone holding a small glowing orb, multicolored light reflecting across his face, while multiple system windows displayed the full shrine expansion requirements. He lifted his gaze with a composed smile and issued the glowing blue system window announced the successful clear of the tutorial dungeon, confirming that the trial had ended. A larger interface followed, displaying the title icon of Hope and Salvation along with its legendary effects and unique abilities. White pillars rose inside a silent temple surrounded by greenery beneath a bright sky, and a small system box identified the location as the Hall of Memories. Vertical text detailed the first hero and the sacrifice required to stop the first disaster, tying the present moment to a past tragedy. The view shifted toward the temple's grand entrance as light flared across the roof, raising the question of whether a return to normal life was truly possible. A system window announced that the return to reality sequence had begun, and the interface faded away. Kim Hyun-sung looked down with a shadowed expression, acknowledging that the city air felt suffocating. Back in a living room, Park Deokgu mopped the floor while Hyun-sung sat on the couch and was told to move so the cleaning could finish. Deokgu paused and looked at him with concern, asking whether he was still dreaming about the final floor as Hyun-sung's hand tightened around his phone. Elsewhere, a man with glasses adjusted them while examining data on a tablet, stating that Kim Hyun-sung's statistics were abnormal. Two boxes of tiered cakes rested on a table as they were introduced as specialties from the capital, and Dyaku clutched his chest while declaring that he would follow Hyunsung regardless of the danger ahead. A glass skyscraper stood beneath the sun, identified as the headquarters of the Blue Guild. Inside, Lee Sang-hee welcomed the group with a clipboard and guided them through a white marble lobby toward the VIP elevators. Steam rose from a cup of coffee in a quiet office as Lee Sang-hee leaned forward and explained the advantages of signing with the Blue Guild. A glowing mana stone floated in the air, identified by the system as a pure mana catalyst, and Hyunsung studied it with narrowed eyes, realizing the offer was meant to bind him. His thoughts shifted to a city street marked as Ground Zero, where an explosion had once turned the sky red, then to a ruined building beneath a gray sky filled with remembered screams. A magical circle flared across the office floor as Lee Sang-hee asked him to lower his energy. Standing within the light, Hyunsung rejected the terms outright while the personnel manager looked down at his notes, sweating as he wondered if Hyunsung had been underestimated. A faint ring glowed within Hyunsung's eye as he observed the manager's rising heart rate. Outside the window, the city skyline stretched beneath the setting sun, signaling the end of the first day back, while a glass of water trembled as lingering mana filled the air. Lee Sang-hee met Hyunsung's gaze and offered to double the signing bonus. Hyunsung stood and prepared to leave, saying he would consider the offer and make contact later. A phone screen later showed a missed call from an unknown number as Hyunsung walked toward the elevator without looking back, recognizing that the icon title was becoming a burden. The elevator descended in silence. Dyaku waited in the lobby checking his watch and asked whether they were about to become rich. Hyunsung shook his head and said they were going home for now. The two walked away from the skyscraper into the city as a system warning flashed at the edge of Hyunsung's vision, reporting an approaching mana signature. He turned sharply and told Dyaku to prepare for combat. Han Seok-woo stood firm on the sidewalk, blocking the path while holding 2 iced coffees as a rhythmic thumping echoed beside him. He said he had been waiting for Kim Shin, who halted on the stone tiles as pedestrians streamed past and let out a brief sound of recognition when their eyes met. Han Seok-woo extended a cup to Kim Shin's chest and insisted he take it because of the heat, while Kim Shin accepted the drink without changing his expression. Seok-woo Shin stared down at the coffee in his hand, his posture sagging slightly as he asked why a scout from a famous guild was following a rank F player. Han Seok-woo leaned in with a serious look and claimed Kim Shin's test results had been a mistake or an unusual fluke. Kim Shin met him with half-lidded eyes and asked what the recruiter's real point was. 3 purple magic crystals floated in a radiant vertical line, as the narration explained that true talent often remained hidden beneath a low rank. Kim Shin looked straight at Han Seok-woo without reacting, and said he had no interest in becoming a hero. Han Seok-woo's eyes widened slightly as his expression stiffened, and he asked whether Kim Shin understood how large the signing bonus was. A vision followed of a man and a woman clashing swords beneath a blood-red sky, their blades colliding in a blinding flash as the text spoke of an eternal struggle between those chosen by the gods. Back in the present, the two stood near a metal fence while Han Seok-woo gestured and asked for 5 minutes of Kim Shin's time. Sweat formed on the recruiter's temple as he added that the guild leader was personally interested. Kim Shin looked up at the sky with reflected light in his eyes and wondered why he could not be left alone. Han Seok-woo raised a finger and made his final argument, stating that Kim Shin could become the world's greatest support player. A chibi image of Kim Shin in saintly robes appeared within a status window, identifying his hidden class as the Saint of Remen. Kim Shin shifted his gaze back to the recruiter and asked how a scout knew about his potential. Han Seok-woo smiled, straightened his suit jacket, and offered to show the true system data. Standing alone against the cityscape, Kim Shin released a quiet sigh and agreed to listen. Han Seok-woo clapped his hands together, thanked him, and promised he would not regret it. A sprawling skyline stretched beneath a clear sky as the guild headquarters were described. An aged parchment appeared in a hand as a voice told the young Kim Shin that his life no longer belonged to him. He stood in a dark stone hallway wearing a high-collared uniform and accepted his role as the saint of the goddess. Before a towering fortress wall, he was told he would serve as the kingdom's shield, while a knight commander at his side said Shin's prayers kept soldiers alive, placed a gauntleted hand on his shoulder, laughed openly, and urged him to trust in the goddess as brothers in arms. Shin looked down with his face in shadow and formally confirmed his duty. His eyes then glowed gold as he began the hymn of fortitude, and power gathered within him. Smoke and fire swallowed a devastated battlefield identified as the Great Cataclysm, and a hand reached out from the haze with a cry for help. Shin walked through the ruined city amid ash and questioned whether the goddess was watching. 3 masked cultists emerged from the shadows of a destroyed building, mocking the saint as fire reflected off one faceplate and the fall of the church was revealed. Shin regarded them calmly, asked if they were from the same temple, and remarked that their masks were tacky as they surrounded him. One cultist lunged with a dagger and shouted for the priest's death, but as the blade swept in, Shin tilted his head, seized the attacker's wrist and struck his chest, shattering bone and sending the body recoiling. The remaining cultists froze and wondered what kind of priest fought that way. Shin smiled brightly as light gathered around him, and said the goddess Riemann loved peace above all else. White radiance poured from his hands and erupted into a pillar that engulfed the cultists, a divine chant echoing through the ruins as he promised to help them find peace. Kim Shin stood in the present as his eyes returned to normal, and he blinked the memory away while Han Xiaoku pointed at his tablet and asked if he was listening to the salary offer. Kim Shin smiled faintly, said he would think about it. Gray smoke rose into the white sky and spread across the ruined battlefield, revealing devastation worse than expected. A masked soldier in dark armor clenched his fist as he surveyed the destruction, his stance still set for combat, before turning toward a figure approaching through the haze and questioning the newcomer. Nearby soldiers held defensive positions as dust and lingering magic filled the air. A tall figure emerged from the smoke with an upright posture, and the fighting paused as Kim Hyun-sung became visible, his hand near his chin while he calmly surveyed the field and asked whether the enemy commander was in charge. He adjusted his collar without hesitation, standing still among hostile forces. The enemy commander, marked by a heart emblem, faced Hyun-sung with a hostile expression and remarked on his nerve for appearing there. Despite cracked armor emitting residual heat, the commander remained upright as Hyun-sung met his gaze and stated that the confrontation would end. Rubble lay between them and the space remained tense and unmoving. Hyun-sung briefly closed his eyes as mana gathered, a faint purple glow forming around his feet. He deliberately pulled on a dark glove, then opened his eyes as golden light shone from them and nearby soldiers pulled back. A column of white light descended from the sky, dispersing the smoke as Hyun-sung vanished in a burst of speed that left a lingering trail behind. An unseen force struck a masked soldier in the chest, lifting him backward into a wall where concrete cracked and his body fell motionless. Hyun-sung reappeared in a low stance among the enemies, his cape settling as the air vibrated and the surrounding foes froze in place. He glanced over his shoulder and asked if that was all they had. The enemy commander shouted as strain twisted his face, then rushed forward and swung his fist, displacing the air. Hyun-sung leaned back and avoided the blow, light reflecting off his monocle as the commander's face appeared within it. Hyun-sung seized the commander's wrist, metal straining as blue electricity spread into the arm and the surrounding air reacted. The commander cried out as energy surged through him, his glowing armor beginning to fracture while blue sparks lit the alley and soldiers stood frozen around them. Hyun-sung struck the commander's abdomen with his free hand, sending a shockwave that cleared debris as the commander slid across the ground, carving a trench and coughing blood while struggling to rise. Hyun-sung stood above him without changing posture as a blue system window appeared, indicating that the condition for purification had been met. He raised his hand, forming a massive magic circle in the clouds as mana flowed toward it, rotating with blue and white light. Lightning descended from the circle and struck multiple locations, erasing shadow creatures one by one. The commander watched his forces vanish and questioned how such a result was possible. Hyun-sung addressed him calmly and stated that the land no longer belonged to the shadows, and as light engulfed the commander, his body disappeared completely. The system window updated to confirm neutralization and restoration, and Hyun-sung released a slow breath. He surveyed the ruins where figures remained hidden among debris, then walked toward a cluster of civilians, his steps echoing through the empty street. Raising his hand in a restrained gesture, the light in his eyes softened as a small child emerged from behind rubble and watched without retreating. Hyun-sung lowered himself and placed his palm on the ground, beginning a restoration chant as cracked pavement shifted, and a green sprout broke through stone. The sprout rapidly bloomed into a flower, fertile soil spreading outward, as green light covered the sector and living vines reclaimed ruined structures. The sky cleared to reveal sunlight and blue distance, and the battlefield lost all smoke. Hyun-sung rose and checked his status window, noting that his saint level had increased as the system interface displayed his hidden class with updated attributes and skills. He dismissed it with emotion and examined his glowing hand, clenching it into a fist. The city block now stood transformed, filled with trees and flowers where ruins had once been. Civilians stepped forward into the light and touched the grass with relief, while Hyun-sung observed from a distance without approaching. A survivor's hand brushed a flower petal that remained vibrant and intact. Hyun-sung turned toward the horizon, inhaled the clear air, and stated that it was finally over for this place. System notification announced the completion of a hidden quest as reward icons hovered, and when he touched one, it dissolved into light and entered his body. The city briefly appeared as it once had in fire and destruction, then immediately shifted to the same location restored and green. Hyun-sung adjusted his monocle as it reflected clear light, standing with his back to the viewer as wind moved through the grass and his hair in the surrounding silence. A faint smile appeared on his face before he turned away and began walking, his cape moving with each step. A dandelion released its seeds into the air, and they drifted